So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about abuses, and this is probably when I'm going to break a sweat. So abuses, yeah, I'm never not sweating. Okay, so abuses, we've broken them up into several major categories. The first one being medical negligence. So what happens with privately run prisons is that they contract medical care through private medical care service companies.
In Cibola County, I know it's called Correct Care.
Oh, I thought it was Care Service.
No, it's called Correct Care or Care Correct.
Care Correct?
But on all the things, it's with care. Oh, yeah, it's Correct Care.
Another major concern are labor rights. And then the last one, amongst many others, because we could probably sit here until the 16th talking about them, is SHU, which is segregated housing units. And so that is using isolation, which theoretically shouldn't be punitive, used for purposes of punishment, but is frequently abused in that manner in private prisons. And there are very few guidelines that dictate any kind of oversight or implementation of that as a non-punitive form of detention. So we're going to speak to abuses more anecdotally. Medical negligence, I don't necessarily feel comfortable speaking to the experiences of our clients or the individuals that we represent, but I think that I'm going to do my best to protect them and their anonymity. I think that they are really powerful because they really illustrate the issues that are present within the system. So medical negligence, for example, an individual that we were working with, they got sick. They said because of the food that they were being given within the prison in Cibola County. And they have a process for requesting medical care with Correct Care. And that is writing out a slip, they call it a request, for medical attention. That is entirely subject to the discretion of the employees at CoreCivic. They can choose to provide medical care. They can also choose to completely ignore it. So this individual, in June, they requested immediate medical attention because they were vomiting, they were having diarrhea because of the food, they were having severe gastrointestinal distress. They submitted 6 requests over the period of the beginning of June until now. They still haven't been seen. They submitted 6 requests and they still weren't seen. We had an individual that is HIV positive as a result of sexual abuse, a sexual assault that they had perpetrated against them. And they didn't receive medical care from the beginning of their time in detention at Cibola County until, I believe it was 2 weeks after. And during that entire point, they identify as transgender. They also weren't receiving the hormonal treatment. So not only were they not receiving their antiretrovirals or any kind of care related to their diagnosis of HIV, they also weren't receiving their necessary hormonal regimen in accordance with their transgender identity, something that supposedly the pod is there to protect and ensure.
Do you have an example of that?
Yeah.
Oh, I was just thinking to give my abuse. One at Cibola and then one at OK. I think the thing that always strikes me about the medical negligence part is that from my just interactions with the CoreCivic employees, it really seems to them that they see that as some sort of luxury. It's like, oh, like you want to go to the doctor a whole bunch? Well, look at you, princess. Like, why are you being so fussy? Why don't you go have a glass of water? Why don't you go just lay down for a while? I've heard glasses of water being prescribed for all kinds of things, from broken toes to heart conditions. Have a glass of water.
Liver failure.
Yeah, liver failure.
Seizures. Seizures?
Yeah.
I've seen
Oh, you're
CoreCivic
having
take
seizures? Your
water.
seizures are increasing? Why don't you go have a glass of water?
You're in the desert, they say.
Yeah, because the first gate that they have to pass through is that that CoreCivic employee, right? This corporate employee whose job is security. They're the one who gets to decide whether or not that person's request gets transferred over to the medical team, right? So yeah, you can see how But I mean, the other thing to keep in mind too is that this very issue is the reason why the Obama administration canceled its contract with CoreCivic for federal criminal detention. So it was like a number of deaths that had happened at Cibola County, and they said, okay, like the medical neglect is out of hand, we're just going to shut down this facility. And then like the next business day or something, like a very short period of time later, ICE picked up the contract, and here we are. Same staff, same corporation, same building, different bodies, same problems.
And this is the norm. These are not the exceptions. Every single person we meet who's detained has a story like this if they're detained long enough in a CoreCivic facility. Or I should say like any correctional group. And some of the stories we hear are so extreme, at least I can speak for myself here, they're so extreme that I don't believe them, and I'm like, there must be something this client's misunderstanding, which of course is a horrific thing to think when someone's talking about their own body and their own care. I had a client in a CoreCivic facility, not in New Mexico, but in another state, who was not provided medical treatment when she miscarried a child this winter. These stories sound like incredibly ghoulish. We actually involved in like multiple cases involving CoreCivic facilities where miscarrying women are not properly treated. And prenatal care. We're detaining pregnant women in corporate facilities and not giving them proper prenatal care. So it's almost like it's like too astonishing to think that it's true, especially when we're dealing with our transgender pod and some of their injuries that are related to sexual abuse, related to them being, trafficked, and their interactions with the cartels. Really vicious stuff is going on, and they're just being treated with like abject negligence to their needs. And it's especially striking in a transgender pod where they're specifically placed there because we are aware as a government that they have unique medical needs that make them more vulnerable than other more general populations. And just because I'm just gonna go jump in the waterfall for a second. We also do this to children. And so one of the risks right now is we're ramping up family detention in the United States. And CoreCivic is the #1 detainer of children in the United States. They have a 2,400 bed facility for children in South Texas, which Emma's been to and I've been to. Tara, you've been there, haven't you? But they use the same. First of all, these medical corporations are not pediatricians, right? And so they have kids, and the average age of kids in these facilities are 6, and they experience the same medical neglect that adults are as well. I've seen kids seizing in corporate prison before, and have them be like they're having seizures, and they can't. They're just like, she should be drinking water. It's astonishing. It's not only astonishing that we do this with adults, but we also do it with kids.
I heard from a mom. I was in Dilley at the Family Detention Center in April. Oh yeah, I was at the Family Detention Center in South Texas in April, and I remember a mom telling me that her daughter had had a high fever and had been vomiting for 2 days, and was told that she wasn't going to be able to get an appointment for another 2 days. And I had submitted multiple requests, and she said, "Yeah, I'm sure we're going to get to the health clinic. I'm sure that I have access to it. They promised me that I will get to go there to take my daughter in a couple days." I said, "For real? If that was my kid and they were vomiting with a high fever, I would take him to the doctor to urgent care that night, you know?" So I think being able to say oh yeah, they definitely have access to medical care, within 48 hours of reporting severe symptoms, for sure they're going to get an appointment at the clinic. I think that's the kind of that attitude of they're going to have access to that. It's not a big deal. They don't look at it the same way as normal medical care. It's sort of just this perk, oh yeah, aren't you so grateful that we're providing a medical clinic to you? And you have access to it. How wonderful. I don't know. The whole thing makes me a little grumpy.
And we're all getting a little Why don't we talk about something a little less upsetting, like labor rights, before we get to this one?
Let's talk about slavery.
Yeah,
a little less upsetting.
Yeah, a little less upsetting.
Okay, so labor rights. I was just in the prison on Tuesday, and some men came up to me. I had read about this issue, and I hadn't had it specifically addressed before until yesterday. So several men came up to me, and I did Peace Corps in Guatemala. I just came back in May, and I've formed kind of like a sense of camaraderie with this particular detainee because he's from Guatemala. And he told me in confidence, like in confianza, as they say, that he's been working for $1 a day, which is the usual amount that private prisons pay the individuals who are detained who work for them in various capacities, either cleaning or cooking, or other small, like, menial tasks. And he's been detained there for several months. He's been working for $1 a day, and he has yet to be paid. So they're paying them $1 a day, which is in violation of several different labor laws, and they're also not even paying them the $1 a day that they're owed. And for example, a call to Guatemala could cost like $15
It's
for a
something
3-minute phone call.
15 cents a minute.
Yeah.
At Cibola. I've heard of jails like in wherever that one man was detained forever. It was so disgusting. Etowah. It's $1 a minute out of Etowah. So the rates are different in every facility. So you work for an hour.
Oh, really?
You work for an hour doing a job that so you can get 1 minute of phone call for. Or in Cibola they have good phone rates. So you're talking a 6-minute phone call to your lawyer, let's say. You have to work for an hour for. And keep in mind, these companies are saving money because when inmates are cleaning and cooking, they don't have to hire locals to do the job. They don't have to hire people living in Grants County because the inmates are doing it for $1 a day.
So, and in the context of immigration detention specifically, many of these people are trying to fight immigration cases while they're detained. So those phone calls aren't just sort of something that makes their life more comfortable. It's vital to the success of their legal case for them to be able to call their loved ones and say, like, hey, can you please send me that police report that I filed when I was still living in San Salvador? I mean, being able to communicate that idea, I made it to the United States. I'm detained in an American prison. I have 30 seconds left on this phone call, and can you please send me this specific document to my address? I mean, how many hours, how many days would you have to work to be able to communicate that very basic idea under these conditions? So it's I think just playing it out a couple more steps is, the rate is bad. The fact that they're not being paid at all is worse. The fact that they're being charged these rates. The fact that they're having to prepare these things without any resources.
The good news with this particular issue is there's a lot of badass creative lawyers right now who are suing these corporations on this issue because there's laws you can sue under here, right? Like that they're in employment violations and human rights violations. I'm not an expert on the Human Rights Act of New Mexico, but that involves employment issues. And this is something where ACLU groups and private civil rights lawyers are finding leverage to actually sue these corporations for damages because they're basically putting slave wages on people doing work. And and this could lead right into this, because if you refuse to work, you're often punished. And
Okay, so SHU, one of the massive complaints and grievous human rights issues within private prison companies is their use of isolation as punishment. For example, if you don't work, you can be sent to SHU. I was just interviewing a woman who's afraid to seek mental health services, which will probably actually be denied to her if she submits a request, because she's afraid that if she divulges too much about her history of trauma, they're going to put her in segregated housing. We have individuals who've been sexually assaulted who've been put in SHU. We have individuals who spoke a certain way to a guard, they're put in SHU. It can be anything. It's totally under the discretion, totally under the jurisdiction of the employees at this private prison.
Explain the conditions of SHU? Is that right?
Can you speak to them? I don't.
So segregated housing is usually like solitary confinement. They get 1 hour outside the cell per day. The number of days that you spend there probably depends on what the reason is for being put there. I had a client who was put in SHU for 7 days because she expressed suicidal ideation to her mental health provider.
I had a client put there for a week because she asked the guards to turn down their music at night.
Yeah, so it's basically the same as you might see on TV, somebody who gets thrown in the hole because they're misbehaving in federal prison. It's the same room of the same building used in this context to hold refugees and immigrants for these insane reasons.
And so ICE has memos basically governing the use of SHU in civil detention, and you're not supposed to spend any more than 15 days. And if they're trying to detain you for more than 15 days in segregated housing, you're supposed to be subject to like a higher level of screening, like justification. Like you can't, but we have multiple clients out in Cibola we have one who's been there for 45 days, another who's been there well over 30 days. And because we just can't, when these injustices are happening, whether it's medical negligence, labor rights, segregated housing, we have no muscle to get these people to change their behavior unless we're threatening to sue in the civil courts. And so like we do have the option for lawsuits, but lawsuits move really slowly. So when we have someone who's expressing suicidal ideations because she's been in SHU for 45 days and is ready to kill herself, we have no immediate remedy to get her out of there besides suing in federal court, which depends on like a lot of things, which is not my expertise. And how fast we can get like a TRO or an injunction or a demand from a federal judge to get them out of there. Immigration judges can't rule on the detention issues. That's an ICE thing. Immigration judges are talking about people's right to be in the country or not. We have to have federal judges who control ICE, and it's a very, very slow-moving process. So when you have someone who is risk of dying because of this, or risk of dying because of medical negligence, as a lawyer, we're astonishingly unable to get help to our clients because we have to use lawsuits and class actions in federal court to get them to move. We don't really know how to do that. I've literally been on the phone with the ACLU for like 4 straight days because we have a client in abject danger right now, and we can't figure out how to get her out. We're gonna do. Is this burning? Yeah.
And specifically about our client who's been in SHU for 45 days, another attorney with the Dreamers Project and I spoke to the warden just casually in passing on her behalf, asking if there was any idea of when she would be released because we're concerned about her well-being and wanted to take advantage of the opportunity. And he said, there's no deadline. Like, there's no point at which we feel like we can release her back into the trans pod. It's not a priority, it's not a concern. And when individuals are told that there is no point at which we see you being released from isolation, that's going to exacerbate any kind of mental health issues. And then their solution to that in response to express suicide ideation is to continue to maintain you in segregated housing.
You should have burned question.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, just have to say this very quickly, because I have been a volunteer up here in public prisons in solitary confinement. And because language is so important, I would like to encourage us all, the SHU is just a euphemism for solitary confinement.
Yeah.
It's the same unit, it's torture under UN, human rights stuff, whatever.
Yeah, we agree with you 100%.
So just it's a small thing that I think if we use the language they use, we are minimizing what we're really talking about.
Sure, I agree. And we tend to use these things because we move fast in these environments, and this is just how we put it in the lawsuits, we speak with the wardens about it, but you're absolutely correct.
And one of the things that was disclosed to me yesterday, actually, during an interview with a client, was that when they're in solitary confinement, specifically for the trans women, they have to bathe in a place that's visible to the men who are detained in solitary confinement. So then they're subject to significant verbal harassment, to continued sexual abuse. And when this particular individual expressed concerns about it to the official within the prison, nothing was done. They were mocked, and they were told that that's the way that it's supposed to be. There's no desire, there's no interest on the behalf of officials within the prison to change any of the conditions, especially for those in solitary confinement, because it's seen as a punishment.
Do you want to go? Oh, because we have
Great.
quite
Yeah,
a
so some numbers. Within 6 years, there were 33,000 complaints of sexual and physical abuse within private prisons. If someone wants to do the math on that, how many per year that is. Have conditions improved? No. Has the prevalence of sexual and physical abuse decreased? No.
I'm sorry, are you talking about private prisons in general or private prisons in which immigrants are detained?
This is private prisons in general, yeah. And then there have been 177 confirmed deaths since 2003. And in investigations of those, they found that a lot of those are due to medical neglect and negligence. So a lot of these deaths are preventable.
It's worth mentioning we had recently a death of a woman who was detained by CoreCivic in Cibola in May of 2018. It's all like I participated in a wrongful death lawsuit about it, so we haven't yet determined if the cause of death happened to her in Cibola or whether it was already imminent. She was only there for 3 days, and so whether it was already imminent when she I'm just not I just want to mention it happened, but also that a lot of facts around it are still really, really gray, and it's a little murky. And so accusing CoreCivic at the moment of being responsible for her death would be a little bit negligent. But just so you know, it will likely come up when you start hearing more about this. But I'm not trying to say they weren't involved. It's just really, really unclear. And so just know that she was in their custody for a few days before she died, but also that there was a complicated chain of custody throughout the government until they got into until she got into CoreCivic care. And so it's going to be a very complicated case. But do know that she died, her name was Roxy, and she died in May of 2018 here at Loveless.
Are there any figures that compare the private system to the public system in relation to this abuse?
In terms of reported abuses and deaths.
Any videos that show?
Any figures? Do we know X number of people are abused in this way and that way? I don't know. I don't think we don't have that figure, but that's something that's if we can figure out, we'll have to show you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
alright, so we're gonna kind of shift gears and we're gonna talk about divestment. So divesting has been kind of like a hot button topic in recent years, socially conscious investing. So these are the big names for you all to be aware of in terms of your private divestment efforts.
Let's just stress that this is shifting a little way from what we're capable of in terms of what's going on with this hearing, and talking more about personal activism and other areas of community activism besides evaluating these contracts with private prisons. This is a slightly different than what we're going to be talking about at the hearing.
But we can also translate it because there's state pensions, there are county pensions. But first we're going to broach it in terms of private investment and divestment. So these names are really important names to remember. So the private prison companies, CoreCivic, GeoCore, MTC, and G4S. And again, in New Mexico, we have active CoreCivic and MTC. So look at your bonds, look at your stocks, see where you have your investments, and you can withdraw them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the banks. So these are the banks that underwrite loans that provide credit to CoreCivic, to Geo Group, for example, if they need a loan, if they need an extended line of credit in the construction of a new detention facility. These are the 6 major banks that are underwriting these. So we have Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, BNP Paribas, I just pronounced that with a Spanish accent, SunTrust, and US Bancorp. So what a lot of individuals are doing, what a lot of cities actually are doing, Seattle just did this recently in response to their awareness of Wells Fargo's underwriting of DAPL and also of private prisons. They withdrew all of their accounts with Wells Fargo. For example, if we're talking about cities, divesting from private prison companies. New York City actually just divested all of their state pension, all of their bonds and stocks from private prison holdings.
I just heard, I was reading, my sister went to Princeton and I was reading her like alumni magazine because apparently I had nothing better to do. And they recently, the students there had this whole movement to divest, because Princeton has like $1 billion invested in their endowments and stuff, and they had a movement on campus to divest Princeton from private prison corporations as well. Sometimes it's like you don't know what's happening. I heard recently that like if you have your money with Vanguard, like this stuff is all super diverse, right? We're talking about money is where I'm really out of my league. Like, I got $2,000 in a bank account, but like this is like you don't always have like a complete picture of who your money's with and where it is, because you're handing it to someone and trusting that they're managing it to make you money and to keep your money safe. And you might not be aware that it's with corporations like this that are actually contributing to like really, really gross human suffering. And so part of the responsible consumer is starting to actually investigate and say like, no, I'm not going to use your retirement fund. I don't have one, so I don't know the names of them. But like, if you're going to be doing this kind of, supporting this kind of industry.
Yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah, if you have your money with a local bank, like I'm with one with the credit union, so I kind of doubt that you're involved with stuff like this, but if you have your money with a local bank, is it possible that they're under the umbrella of a larger bank like this?
Oof,
Good question.
I don't know.
Typically not.
No,
I mean,
they
it's
are.
conceivable, but state chartered banks or local banks are rarely affiliated with these.
And credit unions
Sometimes
also?
if you get a loan with a local bank, they will try to underwrite that they're getting loans from larger banks. So they get their money sometimes from us.
I mean, this is messy business. And it's not necessarily something I would go like immediately like pull all your money from every institution and like start stabbing yourself and whipping yourself over. It's just starting to explore like who is holding my money and what am I supporting without understanding it completely. Because this is how we can actually affect things as consumers and people who have money.
Well, we'll add to that, it's not a personal divestment strategy, but to tie into the things like the hearing on Monday, things that you can do in terms of like state level activism is talk to your legislators about the fact that Wells Fargo is New Mexico's bank. Like everything in the general fund, the money that New Mexico collects and spends is primarily banked with a bank like Wells Fargo. So you can talk to your legislator about
If that's appropriate. Yeah.
And so what divesting does is it jeopardizes the industry's access to capital. It makes it more difficult for them to underwrite securities. It makes lobbying a lot more difficult if they don't have immediate access to the same significant cash flow that they did before. Lobbying, as you saw, $24 million over a period of time in lobbying that incentivizes the creation and utilization of private prison facilities. That makes it more difficult for transparency and oversight. That significantly jeopardizes public safety within private prisons. By removing that access, that's a really powerful way of weakening these companies, these corporations.